The first time Emily told me she'd be working late, I didn't think much of it. After all, we both had demanding jobs, hers as a marketing manager and mine in finance. Our careers had always taken center stage in our marriage, often pushing date nights and shared laughter into the background. But by the third, then the fourth time, in as many weeks, a quiet unease began to creep in. Emily had started dressing up more for work, her makeup just a touch more dramatic, her perfume lingering longer than it used to. It was subtle, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. I convinced myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. I trusted Emily. We'd been married for 10 years, built a life together, talked about children, even adopted a dog, and yet the doubt was insidious, slipping into my mind during quiet moments. One evening, as we sat over a silent dinner, I decided to bring it up. "Work been keeping you busy lately?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She looked up from her plate, her eyes guarded. "Yeah, big campaign coming up, lots of late nights." Her response was measured, practiced even, and it twisted something in my gut. But I nodded, letting it drop. I didn't want to seem accusatory. That night, as she showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced over and saw a message from Stacy, one of Emily's closest friends who lived halfway across the country. But the preview made my heart slam against my ribcage. "Tonight was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." My stomach churned. The ugly reality began to take shape. I could have confronted her then and there, but something held me back. I needed proof. Over the next week, I called her office under the guise of asking her out for lunch. Every time, her secretary informed me that Emily had left for meetings. Once or twice, I drove by her office building, only to find her car missing. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. Emily told me she'd be working, late again, her voice tinged with faint exhaustion. An hour later, I grabbed my keys and drove to her office. Her car wasn't there. I wasn't surprised anymore. Determined, I logged into our shared phone account. Her call logs and messages, usually so mundane, revealed a number she'd been in frequent contact with. A number I didn't recognize. A number not associated with any of her known friends. My hands shook as I dialed it from a burner phone. A man's voice answered, casual and oblivious. "Hey babe, missing me already?" I didn't respond, letting the silence weigh down on him before hanging up. My chest felt heavy, a mixture of anger and heartache. I spent that night in a haze, reliving every moment of our marriage, dissecting every lie. The next morning, I devised my plan. I hired a private investigator who quickly confirmed my worst fears. Emily wasn't just cheating, she was living a double life. Weekend work trips were romantic getaways. Late meetings were dinners and rendezvous at his apartment. It was time for revenge, but not the kind that would land me in jail or ruin my own life. I wanted justice, the kind that left her with nothing but the consequences of her choices. I gathered evidence, photos, texts, recorded calls. I made sure it was all admissible in court, preparing for the inevitable divorce. But before I pulled the trigger, I wanted to confront her lover. His name was David, a colleague of hers, single, smug, and oblivious to the storm headed his way. I showed up at his apartment one evening, knowing Emily was inside. The door opened, and there he stood. The shock of seeing me was almost comical. "Can I help you?" he stammered, already paling. "Yeah, you can," I replied coldly, pushing my way inside. Emily stood frozen in the living room, her face white as a sheet. "You told me you were working late," I said to her, each word a weapon. "And here you are, throwing away everything we built." David tried to interject, but I turned on him, my voice sharper than I had ever heard it. "Did you know she was married, or did she lie to you too?" He swallowed, his eyes darting between us. I didn't know," I snapped, stepping closer until we were eye to eye. "You knew, you just didn't care." Emily finally found her voice, but it was a pathetic, tremulous thing. We can talk about this at home. Please. There's nothing to talk about, I cut her off. You made your choice. I tossed the envelope of evidence onto their coffee table, watching it spill out. Photos of them together, screenshots of their texts. Emily reached for it, her hands shaking. What are you going to do? She whispered, tears streaming down. Her face. I've already filed for divorce, I replied, my voice steady. And you can keep your lover, but you'll lose everything else. I turned to David, whose face had turned a sickly shade of green. Good luck explaining this to HR. I'm pretty sure they have a strict no fraternization policy. With that, I walked out, leaving them in stunned silence. The divorce was swift. I got the house, the car, and even full custody of our dog, one of the few innocents in this mess. David lost his job after HR was anonymously tipped off, and Emily was left scrambling to find a new apartment, her reputation in ruins. The first weekend after the divorce was finalized, I took a trip, somewhere warm, somewhere far away from the wreckage she left behind. I ordered a drink at the beach bar, the sun warm on my face, and realized I felt lighter than I had in years. It was then I knew I was free, unburdened by deceit. Emily had shattered our life together, but in doing so, she'd given me the freedom to rebuild mine, stronger and wiser than before. And as for Emily and David, last I heard, their affair fizzled under the pressure of the real world. She moved back to her parents, and he relocated out of state, both haunted by the destruction they'd caused. Their world had crashed down around them, and I had emerged from the rubble, unscathed and resolute. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about causing pain. It's about moving forward, thriving despite the betrayal. And that's exactly what I did.